Hello humans, welcome to my world of stuff. It's cinema visit time today. It's Tuesday afternoon, just after 4. I'm going to see Last Night in Soho, which is the new film directed by Edgar Wright, starring amongst others Matt Smith, Anna Taylor-Joy. And it's had fantastic reviews. I'm quite a fan of Edgar Wright, going way back to the Space days. Of course, Shaun of the Dead, one of my absolute favourite films of all time, as is Hot Fuzz, A Baby Driver. I'm not massively keen on World's End. However, I will shortly be doing a retro movie review on the World's End because I haven't seen it for years and I think I need to give it another chance. I've watched it 2 or 3 times. It's never really gelled with me in the way the others have. But I think I need to look at it again. So that'll be coming up quite soon. But for now, I'm heading off to the cinema to see the film. I will report back when I've seen it, of course. I will not subject you to any more long, boring scenes of the A470, much as it's very picturesque. But I'm just going to head to the cinema and I will speak to you very soon. Take care.
When you're alone and life is making you lonely, you can always go downtown. When you've got worries, all the noise and the hurry seems to help, I know. Downtown, just listen to the music of the traffic in the city. Linger on the sidewalk where the neon signs are pretty. How can you lose? The lights are much brighter there. You can't forget all your troubles, forget all your cares.
Whoa, not been in the car for a couple of days and it's quite misted over. So I've got the heater on before I set off and I'll be on my way very soon. Okay, so here we are, the Showcase again in Nangaru, which has sort of become my local cinema now. There is a cheaper view cinema near me. I tend to go there for less prestigious films, but I thought that One Night in Soho deserves the proper cinema experience. So I'm going to grab my usual coffee as I go in, get myself seated, and we'll report back after the movie. So I am heading into the cinema. I've got something slightly different today, a gingerbread latte. Keeping it seasonal for Halloween and bonfire night. Here we are, screen 4.
One trip without the fun, look away without the worry.
2 hours later.
Hello, welcome back. Well, I'm in the car. I've just come out from seeing Last Night in Soho, and I'm not going to do what I normally do when I go to the cinema. I'm not going to sit and talk about the film for 5 or 10 minutes because I still have to process it, as they say, and I'm still thinking about what an astonishing cinematic experience that was. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reconvene tomorrow. Can you reconvene as one person? I don't know. Well, I'm going to do that anyway. I'm going to sit quietly tomorrow. I'm going to sit and think about the film because there's a lot to think about this wonderful film. I'll first of all say that it's absolutely fantastic piece of filmmaking. Edgar Wright is a genius. End of. But I'm going to sit and think about it. Well, I'm actually going to a quiz now, but I will think about the film and I will sit tomorrow afternoon and record my thoughts in the cinema room and upload them tomorrow evening. But suffice to say, it's my film of the year. Absolutely wonderful. I'll see you tomorrow.
The next day.
Hello there, welcome to my world of stuff. My name would appear to be Paul Mount. Right, it's now the next day and I'm now in the cinema room and I'm going to talk about Last Night in Soho. And I have gathered my thoughts because it's just a hell of a film. My film of the year, I'm going to say that now, it's my film of the year. Sort of a masterpiece, but it's an odd film because it's so out of step with cinema trends in a way. It's not a superhero film. It's not a franchise film. It's not a remake. It's not a reimagining. And what I love when you go and see a film which is a piece in and of itself. There won't be a sequel to this. This is a story that's been told and then we move on. And I just love that because whatever film you see these days, if it's a hit, there's going to be a sequel around the corner. This is directed and co-written by Edgar Wright, who of course directed the brilliant, I'll brook no disagreement on that, Shaun of the Dead, which is again one of my favourite films, Hot Fuzz, which is brilliant, World's End, which is and more recently Baby Driver, and in fact the documentary The Sparks Brothers, which came out only last month, so he's been a busy boy. which is based, of course, it sort of tells the history and the life of Sparks, the slightly eccentric American pop band who, despite not having had a hit since 1979, are still out there, still touring, still making records. It's a really fascinating film. But this is something different again. This is a sort of, people sort of say it's a horror film, but it's a sort of a psychological horror thriller. And it's also a love letter to London, specifically London of the 60s. The story basically is about a young girl called Ellie Hudson, played by the brilliant, frankly, Thomasin McKenzie. I've not seen her before, but what a performance. She lives in Cornwall with her grandmother, played by the 60s icon Rita Tushingham, who most recently appeared in a film called The Owners, a home invasion film with former Doctor Who Sylvester McCoy. Check that one out, that's quite good fun. She wins a scholarship or bursary to go to London to study fashion at London Fashion College or something. But she's very naive, she's very unworldly, and when she gets up there to London, she finds that it's not what she thought. And it's quite interesting that a line that recurs a couple of times in the film is London can be a lot. And that's what her grandmother says to her before she goes. Because London, first time you go to London, it's just overwhelming because it's London. It's massive. There's so much to do, so many people. It's always on the go. And if you're new to London, it can take your breath away. London can be a lot. And it is a lot. And she can't cope with it. She finds it difficult to make friends. The people that she's staying in don't really take her seriously. They take the mickey out of everything. She's weird. So she ups and leaves the accommodation block and takes up residence in the top floor flat of an eccentric woman called Mrs. Collins, who's played by Dana Rigg. Now, this is Dame Dana Rigg's final screen appearance. She passed away a few months ago. And I have to say, what a final appearance, what a final performance. When Dana Rigg, of course, if you're of a certain age, you remember her from The Avengers, you remember her from James Bond on Her Majesty's Secret Service. She's an absolute acting legend, acting royalty in this country. Phenomenal body of work. Game of Thrones, I suppose younger viewers might remember her from. But she's just a great actress, and her performance in this is just, you would not think that she was close to death watching this film. I mean, I don't know the circumstances of her death. I don't know if she was taken ill suddenly or was ill, but she passed away recently. And Edgar Wright, who directed the film, said he was working with her pretty much right up until her death. So obviously this is the last thing she did, and it's what a performance. Anyway, Ellie takes up residence in this slightly old-fashioned, fusty flat in this woman's sort of house in Good Place in London. But when she's there, the first night she's there, she goes to sleep and she has a dream. This is where it's sort of ambiguous and open to interpretation. She has a dream that she's in the 1960s. She wanders through London and suddenly it's the 1960s London, and it's probably a slightly exaggerated version of what London was like, but it's got all that sort of nightclubs, smoky nightclubs, and Cilla Black is sort of just becoming famous. She's performing at this club that she finds herself in. She's shadowing a girl called Alexandra or Sandy, who's this young model who's just come to London, and she's trying to make her way in the world in London, trying to make her name in show business. She's a singer, and she meets up with a very plausible man or boy called Jack, played by Matt Smith, of course, the former Doctor Who. And they appear to start a relationship, and he promises to make her a star. Doesn't quite end up that way, because it turns out that he's a pimp, and he pimps her out to shady, dodgy, older businessmen. And her life doesn't quite go as she wants it to. Meanwhile, Ellie is observing this, and she goes in and views this world, and it's beautifully directed because you see the 60s, and you see people, and Ellie's there in the background. It's beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful film, beautifully directed. The evocation of 60s London is just astonishing. It's like you're there. And I said, it is a love letter to that particular period in time. The reconstructions of London streets, and the first scene when she goes into 60s London, we sort of pull back to a cinema hall which got a big poster of James Bond Thunderball. And it's just so, it just evokes that era so well, these smoky, slightly sleazy bars and clubs. But back in the real world, Ellie is sort of tormented by these visions or travelling back in time, whatever it is. Something is connecting her with something that happened in the past. And she's sort of drawn to the life of this girl, whose life gets worse and worse as she slips further and further into a form of slavery, I suppose. She's being used basically used and abused by Matt Smith's character. He becomes increasingly violent and increasingly possessive. Meanwhile, Ellie's doing her best to survive in modern London and just finding it hard because she's so haunted by what she's seeing. One of her fellow students tries to encourage her and be friends with her. The other girls are still taking the mickey out of her. She gets a job in a bar to try and help pay her bills. There's a character played by Terence Stamp who appears to be a slightly sleazy predator, but to say any more about him, to say any much more about the film would give away far too much. What I loved about this film is it's not style over substance. It's beautifully made. I mean, the production design is fantastic. Edgar Wright is such a good director, so creative. But there's a hell of a story here, and it's really well plotted, really fits together. It's a mystery. It's a horror film. In the end, you can see elements of Shaun of the Dead there. When it gets to the horror part of it towards the end, there are elements of you can see things from Shaun of the Dead there in certain things that happen, certain visuals. And I think if there's any criticism, I think that perhaps it becomes a little bit too histrionic in the last reel. When you start to discover what's happening, the horror ramps up a bit and it's a bit in your face and it's a bit less subtle than the rest of the film has been. And that's a very minor criticism, and it doesn't, for me, spoil the film or lower the rating I'm going to give it in any way. But it suddenly tips over into what some people might call a parody. I don't think it is a parody, but it tips over into horror cliche in a way. But I think he handles it so well, and the story that has been constructed is so good, and the resolution to it all. I think I sort of guessed what part of that resolution was going to be. Maybe an hour or so in, I thought, I wonder if there's a connection between certain things. And I won't say any more, but it's beautifully constructed. It's a real... You can't take your eyes off it. Once it starts, you're there. And I was even though it's had fantastic reviews, I was thinking, I don't know, 60s thriller, horror, I don't know if it's going to work for me. But it does work for me. I was alive in the 60s. I didn't experience that London in the 60s, but I've seen other films, I've seen things, and I know that's what it was like. And it evokes, again, it evokes it so well. You do feel you're there. Performances are just superb. As I say, Thomasin McKenzie is just wow. Dana Rigg is outstanding. Terence Stamp is great. Matt Smith is great. It's just a really well put together, well-oiled film that looks wonderful. It probably won't be a big hit. I mean, it's come out in Britain and in America at the same time. It didn't do very well in America, but I see no reason why an American audience would want to see a film about 1960 London, horror film or not. It didn't do very well. So it is a very British film. And I suspect it will do well here, but it's not going to be a big hit. It cost $43 million to make it. It took $6 million in America on its first weekend. Don't know how much it's taken in the UK yet, but it's a shame that it won't be a big hit because it deserves to be. But I think Edgar Wright is more interested in telling the stories he wants to tell rather than having big box office hits. I think Baby Driver did really well a few years ago, and that sort of has given the studios a bit more confidence in what he can do. But this is, I'm not going to say it's uncommercial because it's a very well-told story, but it's not an obvious big box office blockbuster because it's about a specific time in a specific place that won't necessarily travel well. But I thought it was fantastic. If you haven't seen it, you really must, because it is a masterpiece. It is a genuinely, brilliant, brilliant film that's had me enraptured, and I will see it again. And because of that, and even though I say I can see where it goes a bit peculiar towards the end, it has to be a 10 out of 10 film for me because I bloody loved it. That's Last Night in Soho, directed by Edgar Wright, is in cinemas now. Please, if you've been thinking, I don't know if I fancy that, if you like Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, you will hopefully know to trust Edgar Wright because he knows what he's doing. He's what a creative visionary of a director. It's out in cinemas now in the UK. Please go and see it. You won't be disappointed. If you've seen it, why not let me know? Leave a comment down below. Please let me know what you thought of it. Also, leave a thumbs up. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel if you've come across this review and you've quite liked it. And you've looked at any of my other videos. There's all sorts of stuff. Press that subscribe button because it'd be nice to get those numbers up. Right, that's me done. Thanks for watching. See you soon, and until I do, you know what they say. Keep taking the stuff!